wanted in this little clip, I wanted to talk to you about a couple of tricks you might want to have up your sleeve just for a field situation where you're trying to understand how well balanced the flow is, or you don't have a pump curve, or your pump's cavitated, or your pump and fill are ruined by cavitation, and how could you come up with the flow rate? And the trick basically comes down to those nozzles, those black things. Tower manufacturers have tables. They're curves, little log curves. The curves basically say for a given orifice size with so many inches of water, you get so many gallons per minute per nozzle, okay? So a couple things about that. A real fast way in the field to tell if the tower flow is balanced, and if you haven't gotten it at this point but watching these strings of videos, when you go look at the towers, pull the basin covers. You want to know that, right? Well, if you want to figure out is the flow balanced, well, if they're identical cells with identical nozzles with identical orifices, if the flow is balanced, the water level in every single basin will be the same depth. Does that make, I guess I can't ask, does that make sense? I'm watching people nodding.
Yes.
I feel nodding. Here we go. Okay. So that's the first thing. You can real easily visually tell with a tower that uses nozzles like this if the flow is balanced between the basins just by looking at the depth. Okay. The second thing is, since you know if you get the nozzle curves, and the nozzle curves are something I always try to get on new construction because they're harder to get after the fact. But if you get the nozzle curves, then if you know the depth over the nozzles and the number of nozzles, you know how many gallons per minute. So for instance, on a job about 2 years ago where condenser water pump test wasn't making sense, and we finally basically opened the suction diffuser, looked at the impeller, and it was all torn up from cavitation. So the pump curve no longer applied. But if we had the nozzle curves, we could basically use the trick I just talked about and figure out the flow rate. They didn't have the nozzle, we finally got them, but they didn't have them that day, so there's a third trick that'll work sometimes. The third trick is, if you shut down the pump, if you think about it, if I turned off the pump, the water's going to drain. You can't go backwards because of the check valve on the pump, right? So the water's going to drain to the bottom of this pipe because the check valve will hold it in that vertical header into these basins, and then it's going to drain out of the basin, out of the hot basin, just trickle through the fill, end up in the cold basin. And so when you turn off the pump, if you really watch close, you'll still hear the water trickling for a minute or two because it's draining all down. Well, that minute or two could help you, because if you measure the level in the basin before you start the pump, and then you start the pump and you time how long it takes before you start to see the rain coming through the fill, and then you measure the level change in the area of the basin, you know how many gallons of water were pumped out in a certain amount of time. And that's basically the pump's flow rate, as long as the pump doesn't have a real gradual acceleration or something like that. So anyways, there's a couple tricks from the field for you that have come in handy for me a couple times. Here's the